Well, happy to be here today. Happy to introduce to you what I would term as a significant cycle maker, cycle breaker among us in the Pacific Northwest. Elmer Dixon is the founder of the Black Panther Party in Seattle area, and the executive director of Minority Executives, in which he trains now in areas of diversity. You're going to be able to hear that background. But I would like to introduce him to you as probably one of my first mentors in life. And I think everyone should have a mentor. Maybe you all have one and don't realize that is a mentor. But I can tell you in my teen years when I met Elmer, I was at one of those formative, impressionable years, and I was in high school in a very small little girls' Catholic school, 100 girls, and he came to speak to a course that was being taught in social activism. And what he did was he came and he shared, not from a perspective of Black Panther activism that involved gun-toting, we're going to protect, and we're out here in violent ways as we have been told that the Black Panther Party was. What he did was he came and shared from a perspective of the social services what the Black Panther Party had done. And what I found out was that he continued to do this work because, as for me, I was a volunteer at a time when he had actually left the Black Panther Party. But we were still practicing 5 of the 10 points of the Black Panther Party. And so his dedication really was able to transmit to young people at that time what it was to be of service. Okay, so one of my wonderful experiences was being part of the Children's Free Breakfast Program. And in the Children's Free Breakfast Program, what we had realized was that children could not learn unless they had a meal. Now, at this time, there was no Children's Free Breakfast Program in the schools. So I really want to honor the forethought of the Black Panther Party for beginning to think about the social services that were needed, because this is how the government came to pick up things like the Children's Free Breakfast Program that is now in schools. I was really honored to work with Carolyn Downs, who is now has a medical center named after her, but she was also one of those very dedicated people, volunteers who went around to the early childhood centers and poked the fingers of little children to determine whether or not they had the sickle cell disease or sickle cell anemia. And that's how little was known at that time about sickle cell. So the Black Panther Party single-handedly put these issues that needed to be faced in the country in view, that these were issues that needed to be faced. Indeed, what we know today as free grocery giveaway for elders and poor was started by this organization. I remember going to Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas dinners that were organized for the community, people who would not be able to benefit from a big family meal but could come out to the community and have a meal. And later I worked with Elmer in the Sidney Miller Free Medical Clinic, where we were actually granted some funds to go around and survey the community around pests and rodents and what kind of presence and impact those might be having in the central area of Seattle. And so it is really, as a college student, I would say, yes, I was a sociology major getting my BA degree, but by the time I met Elmer at the University of Washington, some months later, I was able to practice what I was learning in the classroom and be able to be on the ground. So one thing it is to be in a classroom and learn about theory and to learn about the way that things are constructed and how stratified they are and how some people and equity is left out. But it's another thing to actually practice on the ground with people who are dedicated, not because they're getting paid. This was actually even predating the number of nonprofit organizations we see sprouting up today. All of these nonprofits are based on the volunteerism that had occurred out of necessity of protecting and providing for neighborhoods, for communities that had been disenfranchised. So this man actually was a very young man, I believe 17 years old, when he stood up and said that our community must be protected. Our community needs to be looked after and advocated for. And I am just so honored that some few years later, we're not giving away age, don't worry. And he is very healthy. I have to say, this very fabulous man takes care of his body. First time that I was introduced to being a vegetarian through Elmer Dixon. So it wasn't, yes, okay, it didn't last that long, but the idea, in fact, I remember you used to accuse me of sucking meat juice all the time because I'd say, just put a little of the gravy on there. I will, but I appreciate that it was also about personal health as well as social activism. So the whole self is involved in activism. And so I think this is so befitting that this is February 4th, the beginning of Black History Month, that I can introduce you to an icon, someone who lived in this experience of being able to pull up their sleeves and to be dedicated to community building for life. And so I want to give you Elmer Dixon.
Thank you, Dr. Arunga. When I came in this afternoon or this morning, I looked around and couldn't see anything familiar, and I said, "Where's Marcia Tate at?" That's our history together. Let me begin by saying all power to the people. And see, I can tell that most of you in this room don't understand what that means. Because if you did, you would have echoed it back. I stand before you today not as a politician, not as a Democrat, nor a Republican, but as a revolutionary. And the whole foundation of the Black Panther Party was built on the fact that the Declaration of Independence gave us the right to challenge a government that did not serve and no longer served the interests of the people and had the right to overthrow said government. I don't like to sugarcoat what the Black Panther Party stood for. We were an organization that was defensive-minded. We were going to defend the community against attack, defend ourselves against attack, and we were going to launch an effort. We did launch an effort to challenge the status quo, and based on that Declaration of Independence, overthrow the U.S. government. So I don't sugarcoat that. We built a political party that represented black people. When Huey Newton and Bobby Seale stepped out into the streets of Oakland and organized the 10-point program and launched the Black Panther Party in 1966, it was with the intent of establishing a political party that represented black people and to throw off the yoke of oppression. So at 17 years old, in 1968, when my brother and I and several other people from Seattle traveled to Oakland, actually to San Francisco, to attend the West Coast Conference of Black Student Unions, following not only the death of Martin Luther King a week earlier, but days before that, the murder of the first member of the Black Panther Party, little Bobby Hutton. And that night, that Friday night, the first night of the conference, Bobby Seale was the keynote speaker. And he was very angry, very upset, because this young brother who was 17 years old, 16 when he joined the party, had been murdered in the streets by the Oakland police, shot 30 times by police bullets. And after he gave this fiery speech, you could see the line drawn in the sand. Those that were afraid to death, scared to death, didn't want anything to do with the Black Panther Party, and those that crossed the line and said, we're in. And so this group of us from Seattle made a beeline for Chairman Bobby and told him we wanted to become Black Panthers and start a chapter of the Black Panther Party. He had us come to the funeral of Bobby Hutton the next morning in Oakland, where I remember seeing hundreds of black people, men and women in leather jackets and berets, and I remember thinking to myself, this looks like a black army. And you have to understand that growing up in the 60s, seeing firsthand on a little black and white TV the murders and the lynching, the beatings on the Pettus Bridge, the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, and those mothers and fathers crying because they'd never see their little girls again, the assassination of Malcolm X, of Medgar Evers, of John Kennedy. Very violent times. And as a 17-year-old, when I got into the church, St. Augustine's Church, and saw wrapped around the inside of the church, as big as this room, if not bigger, young men and women in leather jackets and berets with bandoleros across their chests and shotguns in their arms. And little Bobby's coffin was draped in a Panther flag. And when I got the chance to go in front of the coffin, Mrs. Hutton had left the coffin open so that people could see what the police had done to her son. And I looked down into the coffin, and there was little Bobby in his leather jacket and beret, and a Free Huey button on his chest. And he was 17 years old, and I was 17 years old, and I said, that could be me lying in that coffin. That's when I chose to become a servant of the people and a revolutionary, as did my comrades who were down from Seattle. I didn't start the Black Panther Party, we did. I was a co-founder, but we made the commitment to serve our community and, if necessary, to die for the people. You see, when I met Marsha, or Marsha met me, however that worked out, I was on the heels of a potentially violent confrontation with members of my party. And I didn't leave the party. It can be said that maybe the party left me. But we continued to operate the programs for another 6 years until 1982. We were the longest lasting chapter. We were the first organized out of the state of California and the longest lasting chapter in the country, right after central headquarters. And that doesn't say anything unique or special about me or about my comrades, other than the fact that we knew what our mission was, and we were not going to abandon our mission. We were servants of the people. We weren't volunteers. We were servants of the people. We didn't work for money. We worked for liberation. See, the depth of our conviction was based and rooted in the fact that our people were suffering. You don't volunteer to fight. You stand up and fight. The man that said, I'd rather die standing than live on my knees. That was the essence of the Black Panther Party, was the fact that we were going to die standing, not on our knees begging, not on our knees asking, but demanding. See, we learned very early in the party, and Bobby told us that if we were going to become Panthers, we had to read 2 hours a day, attend political education twice a week, own 2 weapons and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. That's when it got real. Because, you ask yourself, so what do I need 1,000 rounds of ammunition for? Because they're coming for you. In 1968, that same year that we started the Seattle chapter, J. Edgar Hoover named the Black Panther Party the #1 threat to the internal security of the United States. You have to ask yourself the impact of that statement. You know, when you think about the #1 threat to the internal security of the United States, see, I'm asking myself, when he makes that statement, what are you hiding? That a band of black revolutionaries who are standing up for the people in our community become the #1 threat to the United States. What are you hiding? Well, the fact is that they weren't hiding nothing. It was in plain view. You know, the rape, the murder, the degradation, you know, the oppression was in plain view as it is today. You got a so-called president standing up in front of the White House who ain't hiding nothing, breaking the laws and making them as he goes. He said, what I did wasn't illegal because he said so it wasn't illegal, but we know it was. See, that's the in-your-face. He represents the in-your-face that this government, that this system has always had. The in-your-face of it. When the Pilgrims were eating their own bodies, when they were starving back in 1692 or whenever it was, they weren't hiding it in your face. They were openly eating people because they were starving. And had it not been for the graciousness of the Native Americans, the First Nations people, to teach them how to grow corn and eat and invite them to what became and has become what we call Thanksgiving, they would have starved to death. And so what they did, their way of thanking those Native Americans was to burn their villages, rape their women, and drive them into non-existence. You'd be shocked the number of tribes that have been driven into non-existence by those first pilgrims that landed here in the United States. I dare you to read a book called The Lies My Teachers Told Me to understand the real truth. So it's been right there in your face. It's been in our face all along. So when Hoover named us the #1 threat to the internal security of the United States, we said, you're damn right. You see, when we had to deal with people in the community, there was no pretense. We weren't out there with weapons to threaten our community. We weren't out there with weapons to threaten anybody. We were out there to demonstrate that we had a right to defend ourselves. The name Black Panther came from the nature of that animal, which is to be defensive-minded. The Black Panther, if you were to see them in captivity, they've got one down in the San Diego Zoo, and you try to peer into their cage or whatever it is, you'll notice that they're trying to get out of your view. They don't want you. They don't want to look at you. They don't want to stand there and growl at you. They don't want any food from you. They want to be left alone. But if you were to step into their enclosure, you'd pay a pretty bad price. It's the defensive-mindedness of the Black Panther, which is what the philosophy of the Black Panther Party was about. Was that if you step in our community and you try to do harm, we would defend the community to the death. So there was no pretense about who we were. The community that we served wasn't afraid of us. You know, the imagery that the media tried to project about the Black Panther Party and make us look like we were, you know, gangs and violent, and you had to fear them and run from them and hide your women and hide your children. The people in the community knew better. They knew who we were. They knew what we stood for. They knew we would defend them, protect their daughters and protect their women. We had women standing shoulder to shoulder with us who were protecting them as well. They knew who we were. So there was no pretense. Huey taught us that power is the ability to define phenomena and make it act in a desired manner. So we set out to look in our community and define the conditions that were affecting us. That's what the 10-point program was. We never cut the program, a 10-point program, in half. We still operated by all 10 of the 10-point programs. We had land, bread, housing, education, justice, and peace. And so the very first program that the Black Panther Party started, Huey said that our community, if they're going to rise to revolution, they have to survive the conditions within this country, the conditions within their community. And so at the forefront were the murders that were happening outright by police riding rampant in the community and shooting who they wanted to shoot. And so the very first program the party started was the Police Alert Patrol. You see, in the Police Alert Patrol, we had a carload of armed Panthers. We had Police Alert Patrols right in Seattle. We got into our car 6 deep, armed with shotguns and .45s and a law book. And when we saw, I'm going to have to use this term because that's what we used then, because that's what they were. When we saw the pigs come into the community, we would follow them and observe them, and if they were stopping someone and attempting to brutalize them, we would get out and we would stand and observe them and say, "We're going to observe you carry out your duty." See, we weren't anti-police. We knew that police had a job to do. We were just putting them in check and make sure they did it right. And if you attempt to brutalize that person or attempt to murder them, we're going to stop you. When Huey told that to the cops on the first Police Alert Patrol, right there on East 14th Street in Oakland, the cop looked up, stunned, and said, "What are you niggas doing with them guns?" And Huey said, "California Code number 54321 says we have a right to observe you carry out your duty. And if you attempt to brutalize or murder that person, we're going to stop you." The pig said, "Like hell you are. Give me that gun, nigga." And Huey said, "This is my weapon," and jacked around into the chamber. And the other 9, 10 Panthers did. That's self-defense. And the cops backed up and they let the brother go that they had been trying to billy club for nothing. And so we defined the phenomena and made it act in a desired manner. That's when Hoover knew that he was dealing with some cats that he had never seen before. They weren't going to sit by idly and take their mess. And so as we continued to organize in the community, we saw that children were starving before they went to school. And we opened up the Children's Free Breakfast Program, define the phenomena, make it act in a desired manner. And the kids that came into the breakfast program, they were black, brown, white, yellow, red, didn't matter what color they were. We didn't call it the Black Children's Free Breakfast Program. It was called the Children's Free Breakfast Program. And so whatever kids were hungry came in. And here in Seattle, we had 5 breakfast program centers around the city, all in the housing projects and at the Atlantic Street Center. Holly Park, Rainier Vista, High Point, yes, the Terrace. Yeah, you worked at Holly Park. Yeah. And so the mothers came out of the community. And the mothers came out and said, "What can we do?" We said, "Do what you got to do what you do best. You want to get into the kitchen, you want to work with the kids." And so they did what they did best. Many of them cooked, some of them worked with the kids. And see, the thing that we told those kids when they came into the breakfast program, that they were kings and queens, that they were leaders, that they mattered, that they meant something. We made them do their homework before they got on the Panther bus to go to school, and made sure that they were prepared to learn. We looked into the community and we saw that the infant mortality rate in the CD was the highest, second highest in the whole state of Washington, right there in that little piece of land. So we went out to a white doctor who we had met, Dr. John Green, head of neurology at the University of Washington. And we said, John, here's what's happening in the community. We got babies dying. And he said, what are we going to do about it? And we said, we need to open a free medical clinic. So he told us to get a big truck and back it up to the loading dock at the University of Washington Hospital on said date at said time, which we did. And when we got there and rang the bell, the big doors rolled up, and there was John with all of the medical equipment that we needed. I said, John, where'd you get that stuff? He said, I appropriated it from the hospital. See, we had one of the models we had in the Black Panther Party was use what you got to get what you need. See, we knew the resources were within the community. They were just holding them back. So John gave us the equipment. He organized 4th and 5th year medical students from the University of Washington, black doctors about to be, and staffed the clinic. And then he supervised them. And we opened our very first clinic in January of 1970, 50 years ago. The Sidney Miller Free Medical Clinic, Well Baby Clinic. That clinic is still operating today as the Carolyn Downs Family Medical Center. It is the only original Black Panther Free Medical Clinic still in operation today, 70-some years later. You see, when we went into the community to organize, people came to us to ask how they could help because they knew what we stood for. They knew what we were about. You know, when I speak to young people that are doing community organizing today, and people, will say, well, how do I get enough people? You got you, is what I say to them. You got yourself, then you got enough. You don't need hundreds of people to organize. You need yourself. And if you're dedicated enough and you're true to what you stand for, then people will come. You don't need bunches of people to do it. People ask me all the time, well, how did you pay for the medical clinic? How did you pay for the breakfast program? Use what you got to get what you need. When we went out to the community and we saw Safeway had bookend stores in our community, went up to the Safeway and said, look, we got kids that are hungry and people that are starving. We need food. And when they refused, we told them, you do that, we're going to shut you down. And I was running the Summer Liberation School that summer in 1969. I remember I went into the Liberation School and I was talking to the kids and I said, what do y'all think about, we've been teaching them about, the means of production and controlling their community and community organizing. These are like 9 and 10, 11-year-old kids. And I said, so what do y'all think about this? And they said, no. If you're gonna operate in our community, then you need to make sure that you support the community. And so they organized the first boycott. And they made up their own signs and they went down to the Safeway and they were lined in front of the Safeway, kids, with signs that said, I'm hungry and the Panther Free Breakfast Program needs food and they won't give us any. So some people in the community wasn't quite sure what to make of that. People needed groceries, so they went on into the grocery store. So the kids said, here's what we're going to do. They talked to a couple of parents, thank you, and adults and said, look, we want you to go into the store and load up that grocery cart with a couple of $100 worth of groceries up to the top. And when you get to the checkout stand, after all of it's checked out and bagged, tell the checker, I changed my mind. 2 weeks later, both the Safeways were closed. They got tired of putting all them groceries back and selling no groceries. Both stores were closed. Now, where were the people going to get food? Well, right around the corner from the Safeway up there on 23rd and Union, there was a little Jewish market called Jack's Mini Mart. And I remember going in and I said, Jack, we need some food for the breakfast program. And Jack said, well, how much you need? I said, Jack, this ain't no shakedown. Whatever you can give us. So Jack gave us some eggs and gave us some meat on a regular basis, and we let the community know it. So that's where they started getting more of their groceries, and you know what? They supported him because he supported the community. He closed that little store, went up to the big street on 23rd and Union, bought the gas station, the Shell gas station, and opened up Jack's Super Mini Mart. And he thrived in that community until he decided to retire because he had given back to the community and the community knew it. See, that's the power of the people. That's the power of those kids. That's the power of community organizing. We didn't need 200, 300 people to do that. These were babies that went up and closed that store because they were educated, politically educated. They knew their worth and they knew their power. And so that's what the Black Panther Party stood for, was bringing power back to the people. That's why when I started off and I said all power to the people, that's not just some empty comment or some empty word. See, power to the people is about taking back and taking control and standing up and being about something. You see, when Fred Hampton stood up in Chicago that same year and said to a big giant audience of students that were gathering in Chicago on the South Side about community organizing, he said, what we need is white power for white people, brown power for brown people, red power for red people, yellow power for yellow people, and black power for black people. What we need is all power to the people. And he said, what we need is a rainbow coalition. The first Rainbow Coalition was organized by the Black Panther Party, not by Jesse Jackson. It was the Black Panther Party. You see, use what you got to get what you need. And so we had coalitions with the Brown Berets, with the Red Guard, with the Patriot Party, which is a group of white students out of Appalachia, with the Young Lords. We built an international organization. By the end of '68, we had chapters all across the United States, an international section in Algeria, support groups in Denmark and Sweden, the Black Panther Party in London, and one in all the way down under in New Zealand. Support groups in the ANC in South Africa, the People's Republic of China, and the Ho Chi Minh Trail. See, we built an international organization with just a few niggas with guns that had the audacity to stand up and say, no, not in my house, not in my community. And so J. Edgar Hoover named 3 cities for elimination. The 3 cities he targeted were Los Angeles, Chicago, and Seattle. He started out by murdering Bunchy Carter and John Huggins in January of 1969. I have to bring this up because it's very relevant to what is happening today in a number of ways. Bunchy Carter was the leader of the Southern California chapter in LA. John Huggins was his deputy. And Bunchy Carter had been the head of the Slossons, which was the largest gang in Southern California before he joined the Black Panther Party. And his influence over those 5,000 gang members is what terrified J. Edgar Hoover. And so J. Edgar Hoover put out a memo to his field agents to destroy, discredit, and disrupt the activities of what he called black hate groups and prevent the rise of a black messiah. And one of those partnerships that the LA office created was with a guy by the name of Maulama Ron Karinga, who had a group called United Slaves. And they conspired and they shot Bunchy and John in the back on the campus of LA. And for his reward, he was given a black holiday called Kwanzaa on the blood and the deaths of members of the Black Panther Party. So if you go out and you celebrate that so-called holiday that was created by a CIA agent and given to an FBI informant, Ron Karenga, know what you're celebrating. Now, the deeper end of that was that as they began to destroy this, attempt to destroy the LA chapter, later on that year, they would come back around to LA. Later that year, they went to Chicago in December of 1969. And the head of security for the Illinois State Chapter and the Chicago Black Panther Party was an FBI informant, unbeknownst to us. He was also head of Fred Hampton's personal bodyguard detail. And he drew the alcohol, firearms, and tobacco agents a diagram of Fred Hampton's apartment, where his bedroom was, where his bed was positioned, and what side of the bed he slept on. And the night before they were to attack, see, these guys were cowards. You know, you see all these TV shows, then they're heroes today. They were cowards because they had George Sams, the agent, drugged the Panthers that were about 30, 40 Panthers in Fred Hampton's apartment because they were having an organizing meeting, had them drug their coffee with Seconal, red devils we used to call them. So that when the pigs came in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, dressed as telephone repairmen, and began firing through the walls and the doors, the Panthers were all drugged with Seconal. And so after the firing stopped and they came in, and Mark Clark, who was the head of the Peoria chapter, was killed instantly, they went to Fred's bedroom, where laying next to Fred was his wife, future wife, Deborah Hampton. And as she testified in court, she was 6 months pregnant at the time, and luckily had not been hit in the torso. Some of you that came to our 50th anniversary in Seattle a couple of years ago met Fred Hampton Jr. He was the baby that was in the belly. And as they drug her out of the bedroom, she heard the pigs say, "Is he dead yet?" And one of them said, "No, he's still got a pulse, he's breathing." And she heard a couple more rounds of fire go off, and at point blank they shot him in the head to make sure he was dead. And one of them laughed and said, "He's good and dead now." That's premeditated murder. Premeditated murder. Days later, we got the news that night, and we were all on high alert. The head of security for the Seattle chapter and Washington State chapter of the Black Panther Party was none other than myself. And so we didn't have an agent in that position. So we were prepared and ready. They went to LA days later, and we didn't know we were on the hit list. They went to LA and they formed the first SWAT team. That's when SWAT was formed. They created SWAT for the Black Panther Party. That's how terrified they were of us. But see, what they didn't know was we had Vietnam vets that taught us how to build our offices and fortify our offices. And so when they vamped on the LA office and blew the door off with a bomb and got into the front door, they didn't realize that you had to step down because they had never been in there themselves. Panthers had dug a trench, and they fell flat on their faces with all of their weapons and their batons and whatever else they were carrying. They gathered themselves and got up and walked down the narrow hallway. They had to take a quick left, and then a quick right, and there was the officer of the day with 6, 7 Panthers, and they just unloaded on him and blew him right back out of the office. And the Panthers fought them to a standstill for the next several hours. And after they were low on ammunition or running out of ammunition, several of their Panthers had been wounded, they surrendered. They knew to strip down, because if they didn't strip down, the cops would murder them like they murdered little Bobby. So they stripped down, and they were all arrested and taken to jail and charged with attempted murder on police officers. And I'll go fast forward months later to their trial, and at the opening arguments, after the judge heard the police side and the Panthers lawyer, the judge said, well, it's clear to me that the police were the aggressors here, and dismissed all the charges. Now, days after that Panther raid in LA, they came to Seattle. Keeping in mind, we didn't know that they were coming. And so we were doing an ordinary day of community organizing, out selling Panther papers out in the field, running breakfast programs, running the prisons, busing the prisons program, all of the programs that we had. We had some 60 programs across the country. And we got a call at the end of the day from a local reporter by the name of Don McGaffin. Don McGaffin was very popular, very vocal reporter for Como TV. Told me, he said, I'm down here in the police station. He's almost whispering. I said, what's going on, Don? He said, they're getting all their ammunition and all their arms ready. And he said, when I asked them what they're doing, he said, we're going to go get those Dixon brothers tonight. And so he tipped us off. So what do you think we did? Think we ran for the hills? You know, we just strapped down because we had probably 50,000 rounds of ammunition in the house. All the Panthers that were in the house, we had probably 40 weapons. We had gas masks, we had bulletproof vests, and we said, okay, thanks, Don. We'll take care of it from here. Well, that night we were on red alert. We always had 24-hour guards in our offices all across the country, 24-hour guard. But this night, everybody was up. We had teams out in the street that when the pigs vamped, they would get attacked from the rear. Cops didn't know that. And so on the way to the shootout, an interesting thing happened. You see, the ATF, or AFT, whatever they're called, I told you how cowardly they are. They weren't going to attack by themselves. So they had to get permission from the mayor to use the Seattle Police Department. That's why Seattle police were all excited. We're going to go get them dudes tonight. So the AFT went into the mayor's office and said, asking for permission to use the police for tactical support. And the mayor said, well, why do you want to attack their office? And as they would usually say, our informant tells us that they have illegal weapons. And the mayor retorted, Mayor Wes Ullman, well, my informant tells me that all of their weapons are legal. And he said, you will not be using Seattle police. There will be no bloodbath in my city. And so they left town with their tails between their legs. You see, when you stand for something, when people know who you are, the enemy will come after you. Those of you that are young organizers today, you'll know you're making a difference when someone's trying to kick your ass. Because you're making a difference. They'll come after you. And so Marcia wanted me to mention, some of the influence that we had in our community on elected officials or whatever not. I don't know what kind of influence we had. I know that they started school lunch and breakfast programs because of the Black Panther Party. I know 50 years later, Obama's running around talking about Obamacare because of the Black Panther Party did it first. And I know that You know, all we had to do was show up. All we had to do was show up. And people knew what we stood for. You got to stand for something. You know, we were able to collaborate in our community. That's how we got the clinic off the ground. That's how we got, we were able to rebuild the clinic into the Carolyn Downs Family Medical Center, so it's operating free form today. You know, the feeding programs that Marcia talked about. You know, there was a little grocery store around the corner from our headquarters up on 20th and Spruce called Charlie's Market. And Charlie turned us on to his suppliers who had, produce suppliers. A white farmer out in Linwood who had a chicken farm and an egg farm, who gave us hundreds of dozens of eggs every week. The grocers gave us the fresh veggies. Gay's Bakery, we had a relationship with Gay's Bakery when we were kids. 8, 9 years old, we used to go up and see Rosa in the thrift counter and get 5-cent donuts. And we went in to see Rosa. We said, Rosa, we need bread for the breakfast program. She said, let me talk to Mr. Gay. We got hundreds of loads of bread every week for the food bank and for the breakfast program because of that relationship that we built. It's about building relationships, and it's about standing for something and standing up and never backing off of what you stand for. That is the power of community organizing. That is the power. You have the power within yourselves to do it. Don't let anybody tell you can't. Black, white, brown, gay, straight, Q, whatever. Don't let anybody tell you can't, because you can. All power to the people.
Like to ask a question. We give you maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll do a give back. Yes.
I was just going to ask, much of the in-the-face threats against the black community that you talked about from the 60s are present still, for instance, police brutality. What groups are there, if there is one, that carries the Black Panther Party's mission of self-protection against those kind of threats today that you would support and applaud, if any?
That's a real good question. I think that first of all, the methods, some of the methods that we used in the 60s, such as the police alert patrol, would not work today. You're looking at a militarized operation in the police departments across this country. And so that kind of effort will not work. There are groups like Black Lives Matter that are standing up, and organizations representing black mothers and brown mothers that are standing up to at least have a voice to be heard. And so I think it's about drawing attention to and being aware of and making those statements that matters today. People use as weapons today their cell phones, and their cameras on their cell phones. And most of those things that you see are not organized. They're individuals that are out there, making sure that they're keeping an eye out. And so I think the most important thing is for people to stay aware and not be lulled to sleep, and be aware of the conditions within your community and speak out and say something. That's the most important weapon I think that we have today.
Yeah, what role, if any, did John Lennon play? Because I just heard he and Yoko sing "Power to the People."
Yeah.
Power to the people, right on.
Yeah, there were a lot of musicians that really were vocal and out there, speaking the truth, and they were a couple of them. One that I will draw attention to was a Seattle native, and and who was probably the most acclaimed guitar player of his time and of all time. And Jimi Hendrix was a revolutionary in his own right. And if you look at his music and the songs and the way that he played that Star-Spangled Banner, which was a statement, he hired the Black Panther Party in Seattle to be security for his last Seattle concert. And after the show, when I went backstage to kick it with him, and he was just thrilled to death that Seattle even had a Black Panther Party, and that those of us that were organizers came from the same high school, Garfield High School. And I asked him, for a donation to the breakfast program. He said, no, I'm going to do one better. When I get back from this next trip, I'm going to do a whole benefit concert for the breakfast program. His outspokenness and his support for revolution is what cost him his life in London. Make no mistake. So there are a lot of those that were leaders in the music industry that stood up and spoke out. But I like to draw attention to him and to the godfather of soul, James Brown.
Do you have any suggestions how we can take down our current president? The only thing I know is going to marches and voting and writing letters.
Don't get me arrested. If I say the wrong thing, boy, they'll come and get me for saying something about the demise of the. He's gonna do himself in. Fools like that are always gonna do themselves in. Well, hell, I don't know when. I'd like to see the fool go down today, but I think that you have to stay vigilant. You have to have a voice. You have to get out there now, and when you think about voting, yes, you have to exercise your right to vote, but you have to have a voice. See, I think the thing that's important about this idiot is that he really exemplifies what the power structure in this country has always done effectively, and that's divide and conquer. That has been what they have done effectively throughout history. When they wanted to wipe out the Indians, they engaged Pocahontas. When they wanted to wipe out the black community, they got the house nigger. I hesitate to use that term because many of the people that were house Negroes, did some good, but they were looking for opportunities to divide the black community. When they attacked the Black Panther Party, what did they do? They organized other black groups to attack the Black Panther Party, Ron Karenga's group. When they wanted to divide the Black Panther Party, they sent letters to Eldridge Cleaver in Algeria and told him that Huey was planning to assassinate him, and vice versa. They sent letters that apparently came out of Algeria saying that Eldridge was going to assassinate Huey, and they sowed seeds of distrust. And so this president is all about dividing and conquer, getting people frothed up at the mouth, with a fever's pitch, so you can go out there and the other side can go out there and kill each other in the street. See, we can't fall for that game. We can't fall for this game that, and many people have, that step in goose step with whatever comes out of his mouth, no matter what he does. He can grab all the women he wants in the private parts and they will still follow him down the trail. But there are reasonable people on the other side. And so you find those reasonable people and talk to the reasonable people. And you organize within your community. The only hope we have of keeping him out of office, you can see what he did in the impeachment hearing. Don't matter what you're going to charge you're going to bring against him, he's going to then say, well, that's not illegal anymore because it's for me. So, that's an endless path. So get out and defeat his ass at the polls. Organize within your community. Not only organize other like-minded people, but, work with people that have been duped by him, so that you can at least present a reasonable argument and talk like reasonable people rather than yelling at each other.
That's right.
Because he will do himself in.
Oh,
All power to the people.
so Yeah, so my question is, well, since you have a experience and a revolution that you started, you and your team, is the Black Lives Matter group reach out to you guys for your experience, how to be advocate for the communities, or is there any kind of relationship between the two?
Yeah, Marcia was hesitant to tell my age. I'm not hesitant to tell my age. I'll be 70 years old this year. Oh. And what I know is that the lessons that we have learned are valuable lessons to whoever will listen to them. And, I openly support and challenge young leaders to step forward. Joaquin Garrett in Seattle, who's leading the Africa Town, I advise him when he asks for my advice. I've had members from Black Lives Matter ask me for advice, and I will advise them because it is their time. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to step back into the shadows and not continue to advocate, because I'm going to. But it's their time now. It's your time. You're the leader. You stand up. You have a voice. Because they gave you an award, say, I don't care about that award. Here's what we need to do now.
Yes.
What are you going to do for me lately?
Did he not disappoint? Elmer Dixon. Yes. What an honor. What an honor.